Hello, I'm Michael Whitaker. This is the second of 21 photo posts that I will be doing on LinkedIn and Facebook. This is the follow-up video for post number 2. The subject or the photograph to be used in this particular post is entitled Love and Affection. Again, the purpose of these videos is to provide some insight into the thought processes that were going on when I capture specific images. To give some background for this particular image, throughout my first career, which was based on my background in social psychology, I ran programs primarily for violent juvenile offenders and sexually abused children, although I did work 2 years later with homeless families. When I worked with violent juvenile offenders and sexually abused children, I required the participation of parents in the programs. Excuse me. I felt it was essential for the parents to be involved if there was any chance for these youths to go back home and not be a threat to the community. I'm talking about the violent juvenile offenders at this point. So I always had parent participation. With few exceptions, there were exceptions, but there were a few exceptions. Most parents were really caring and concerned people who were genuinely interested in helping their youth, their children, never reoffend again. So periodically I held parent groups and we sat down and discussed a range of issues about what was going on with them and how they were responding to the activities in my program. One of the questions I always asked at the beginning of new parent groups was, when was the last time you celebrated your child? Most people, when I ask that question, will look around to see what other people might be thinking or saying. And usually one or more people, usually women, would speak up and say, "Celebrate my child? Are you kidding? The only thing I celebrate is making it through the end of the day." And that pretty much describes what the relationships were between parents and the violent juvenile offenders. Most of these parents saw parenthood as a real chore and not as a very frequent source of joy. I was used to working on what I called the dark side of American society. The violent kids I worked with had been convicted of murder, rape, armed robbery, aggravated assault, arson of an occupied dwelling, and kidnapping. And when I ran a program just for juvenile sexual offenders, we only worked with kids who had raped strangers. So these were people who had really done a lot of harm to other people. So I was used to working on the dark side of life. I'd seen things that I never imagined growing up. It was all that side of life was pretty routine to me. Beginning the last 5 years of my first career, I was asked to go to a small town of about 2,500 people to investigate an extremely high level of sexual abuse within the community. I worked with the probation officer there, the juvenile probation officer. And it took us a while, 6 or 8 weeks, to figure out that the scout leader in that community had sexually abused over 200 boys during a 13-year period. For a big city, that's a lot of boys. For a small town, it was overwhelming. The subsequent problems related to that abuse were literally just overwhelming. They were staggering. It was very difficult to deal with the issues. My primary job in the beginning is that I would go into this little town, park my car at the courthouse, and go in to have meetings with parents, during which I would inform them that we have corroborated evidence that their children had been sexually abused. Our daughter went to college on a rowing scholarship, so there was a U.S. rowing sticker on the back windshield of my car, on the back window of my car. It got to the point when families or parents came to the courthouse and they saw my car parked in the parking lot, they wouldn't come in because they knew what was about to happen. So I had to start parking down the hill and walking up so as not to tip off parents that I was in the building. My experiences during those 5 years was just an overwhelming burden. Even though I was accustomed to living on the dark side or working on the dark side of American society, working in this town for 5 years made my world look too dark. I did not see many bright aspects of life, particularly during the end of those 5 years. I was on a national task force for sexual abuse for 10 years, and when one of the therapists on that task force approached me and said, I have a diagnosis for you. And I said, I don't want a diagnosis. And she said, come on, let me tell you what I think is your problem. I said, okay, what do you think is my problem? She said, you're all used up. You don't have anything left to give. It's time to change careers or to find a different aspect of this career. My original thought I'd go back to college. I received an invitation to get my PhD at a good university, and those were our plans. But 2 months before I was to enter school, I talked to my wife and said, I don't want to do the psychology stuff anymore. I want to do something different. And she said, like what? And I said, like go to art school to study photography. So I studied photography for 2 years. When I ended my first career and began my photography career, my absolute commitment was to capturing images that reflected a brighter aspect of life than I had dealt with during the past 25 years. I was working with a photography teacher named Richard Hurst at that point, and Rich said you need to put together a formal proposal and describe what it is you wanted to do. I put together a project and I entitled it Searching for the Light, because I had a very dark view of the world at that point. So I began looking for images. I traveled a lot during those first 2 or 3 years of my photography career. And at one point, I was in Nice, France. And I love open markets, outdoor markets. So I was at the outdoor market, just walking around, had my camera with me. And I encountered a man dressed as a clown. And he was up on a small platform, like a little stage. And on that stage, he had a little box where you drop money in. And he stood there perfectly still, not moving, not doing anything. That's real common. I've run into that several times throughout Europe to find mimes who are just there totally still. But when somebody go up and drop some money, a coin, into that box on his stage, he would go into a very animated robotic dance. It was very entertaining. It was also humorous. I stood there and watched it a couple of times. The crowd got larger. And as the crowd increased, I started scanning the crowd, thinking there might be a photo here somewhere. When I was looking around the crowd, I spotted the woman in this photograph with this young boy, who I assumed at the time was her son. And I still believe it's their son, but I don't have proof of that. The thing that amazed me, first of all, is that the clown had completely captivated the young boy. His attention was focused, totally focused on this clown. There was good reason. It was very entertaining. When I looked at the mother, I thought, well, she'll be looking at the clown also. She was not. She was staring down at the young boy. And this image is the best image that I captured of her. To me, having spent 25 years working with families who never got much joy out of being parents, this made my heart light up, literally. Look at the expression on this lady's face. She could not be happier. She could not be prouder. She could not be more filled with joy. I was absolutely overwhelmed. I mean, it was an emotional experience to see this woman, and I was committed to capturing this image, and I did. I mentioned at the first of the post on the social media post that this is my favorite photograph. It is my favorite photograph after all these years. I have one that's pretty close, and I'll probably show that to you in photo post number 3. But the first standard that I want to meet when I'm capturing an image is when I look at that image, I want to see in that image what I saw in real life. When I look at this image, I see what I saw that day standing there watching this woman and this young boy. Nothing makes me happier. In France, there's a thing called Article 9 of the Civil Code. It is designed to protect the privacy of its citizens, the citizens of France. Typically, and I'll discuss this in other posts, like when I went to Florida, when I went to Cuba, I always asked permission to take photographs of people. I did not ask this lady's permission to take her photograph or her son's. Thus, I feel like, in a way, this photograph could potentially fall under the purview of Article 9. So I've never published it. I have never sold it. Other people have seen it. I'm not going to move the camera, but it hangs right here in a 24 by 36 vision about 3 feet from the end of my arm. This is my favorite photograph. It inspires me to continue to try to capture what I see when I'm out there in the world making photographs. So I love this image. I would love to know who this lady is. In Cuba, I went back to everyone that I captured their image, and I gave them a copy of the photograph. I would love for somebody in Nice to know who this lady is, and I would love to send her this photograph because I have such great affection for it. But again, the purpose of this brief video is to say that's what was going on in my mind. You know, the experiences of my 25-year career fill my head. There is a theory that everything that goes into your brain stays in there. It doesn't leave. The issue is trying to access it. I have all of those memories and experiences from those 25 years in my head. When I saw this lady at the open market, the outdoor market in Nice, it triggered all of those thoughts in my head of all of the disheartening experiences that I'd had during that first career. The title of this particular lesson is Antitheses of Disheartening Experiences. Experiences where I was disappointed or let down or even sometimes depressed. I want to catch images. I want to capture images that are the antithesis, the opposite of that. This image, this photograph, I refer to as love and affection, is a prime, classic representation of the majority of my experiences with parents during my first career. I cannot think of too much more to say about this image. I will tell you I specifically framed this image to catch the young couple holding hands in the background. I was taught by Rich Hurst that you try to put as much depth and content into an image as possible. When I first started capturing images, I used a very short depth of field, and Rich would tell me, I love your images. They're like actors on a stage. He said the problem is they're all on the same stage. Because of the depth of field I used, it sort of blurred out the background. So I now use a very deep depth of field so that I can show what's going on in the entire image. I'm literally obsessed with that, and that's sometimes a problem. But this image, I positioned myself so I could catch the woman with the young boy and this couple in the background holding hands. Thus the name Love and Affection. If you have questions, please put them into the comment section on either LinkedIn or Facebook, and I will try to respond. As always, I sincerely appreciate your attention. Thank you.